Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and a few weeks ago, a fellow IEM reviewer, Precog Vision, loaned me the Moondrop S8, which is what I've got here in my hand. And if you're not familiar with this earphone, well, it actually came out, I think, in late 2019. And, well, it's an all balanced armature set. It's got 8 balanced armatures per side, hence the name S8. And I think an important thing to understand about this earphone is that it's not cheap. This is a $700 earphone. And I was really kind of curious to figure out, right? With the Moondrop Blessing 2 and especially the Dusk that came afterward, is it still worth considering something like the Moondrop S8, which again, 700 bucks, that's a lot. So for the past few weeks, I've been living with this earphone and I'm ready to answer that question, I suppose. So this is a live review. If you're watching now, this is live. If you've got any questions for me, please hit me up in the live chat down below. But if you're watching the VOD, that means you missed out. So if you don't want to miss out next time, go ahead and just subscribe to the channel. That's the word I was trying to say there. Ding the bell, and then YouTube will let you know next time I'm live, and then we can have a conversation. But for now, let's talk about the Moondrop S8, which I think we can all agree. I don't know. Does anyone disagree with me? Hit me up in the live chat. Does anybody disagree that this is one of the most beautiful IEMs? I think this thing looks fantastic. So we'll start by talking about the build of the S8, which there's a lot to like here. Not only is it aesthetically beautiful, but there's some other things that I think are pretty nice. The build to construction here, as you can kind of see, is just a solid resin acrylic shell. It's got this glass-like look to it. It bends light as it comes through. It's not hollow, but it's not especially heavy in the hand. It's got a pretty decent weight to it, but it's definitely not a heavy IEM. I didn't weigh it on my scale, but I would guess this is probably in like the realm of 10 grams or less. But yeah, just generally pretty happy with the general look of the shell. And then the quality of the materials. So the Moondrop Blessing 2 has got a similar build to it, right? You've seen that earphone. In fact, here, I'll pull it in just for a comparison. Let's see. So here's the Moondrop Blessing 2. In fact, this is the Dusk model. You can see it's a very similar build, but if we're getting picky, the clarity of the acrylic shell on the S8 is just kind of like next level. And does that matter for how it sounds? No, not one bit, but it does matter for how you feel about your product. And when you're paying $700 for an IEM, for anything really, you want it to not just perform well, you also want to feel good about it, and that to me is actually pretty important. Other build quality things we can talk about, this cable is actually the exact same cable that comes on the Moondrop Blessing 2 and the Blessing 2 Dusk, which is, I think, a decent cable. Not like a high quality cable, not like the top tier quality cable like you might get on something like the Dunu SA6, but I do find it's otherwise, it's generally a pretty good cable. I'll show that it coils up well, packs away well. It's not very bulky. It's a little bit on the thin side, a little bit on the wiry side, but generally pretty okay with this cable. And then we'll talk about the fit, which is one of my favorite things about the Moondrop S8. So the Blessing 2, very similar design, but most reviews that talk about the Blessing 2 are gonna give you that little caveat that it does fit a little bit large in the ear, and I have that issue. I don't even want to say it's an issue because it's like I'm fine with it, but you're aware that it's there. The Moondrop S8, at least for me, and these are just my ears, fits me almost exactly perfectly. Like I love the way this thing fits. The nozzles on it are still a little bit on the long side and a little bit on the thick side as we can punch in. Here, I'll go ahead and take off the tip. The nozzles are still a little bit on the thick side, but they don't seem to have the same sort of taper all the way to the end like they do on the Blessing 2. And that for me, maybe it's partly that, partly a combination of the more contoured shape of the inside of the shell here, but just generally, I find that this fits me more effortlessly than the Blessing 2. I don't know that that's necessarily a feature of, that you get for $700 is necessarily that more contoured fit, but it just happens to be that the S8, again, at least for me, fits me even better. The one thing I will call out though is that the S8, because it is an all balanced armature set, I guess it's not true of all BA sets, but It's definitely true of this one. It's unvented. So when you plug it in, it fills up a lot of your ear, and not only does it cause or does it generate a lot of isolation, very, very strong isolation, it also can be a little bit uncomfortable for some folks who are not familiar with that sensation, or even some folks that are familiar with it just never get adjusted to it. The fact that this thing creates such a pretty strong seal in your ear and there's no venting, so like no air venting in there, just means that there's going to be some pressure built up that either you'll get used to or you won't. Sort of thing's worth knowing. But yeah, I don't know if there's much else I can say about the build of this earphone. I mean, I guess I did skip over the accessories that you get with it, which is exactly what you get with the Moondrop Blessing 2. You get the same case, you get the same set of tips, and I think you get an airline adapter. But other than that, mostly what you're paying for is the earphone itself. And I guess what that leads us into just, let's talk about the sound of the Moondrop S8. And tonally, this thing I think is more similar to the Moondrop Blessing 2 Cross Chronicle Dusk than it is to the original Blessing 2. Sorry if that was confusing, I'll just be clear. I think this thing tonally is more in line with the Dusk edition of the Blessing 2 and different than the original Blessing 2, which means it's kind of a, I mean, it's relatively neutral, a little bit on the thin sounding side. It's got a pretty significant sub-bass boost, but you definitely, I wouldn't call this a bassy IEM. I think anyone who's concerned about the amount of bass is going to be satisfied with bass here, but if you are a bass head, a known bass head, this is not a bass-centric IEM. It's got a good sub-bass focus, but not the dominant thing there. So yeah, just overall, I would describe this as generally thin, neutral with bass boost. Whether or not that's what you're looking for, that's up to you. But I gotta say, personally, I actually quite like the tone of this earphone. If you recall my review of the Moondrop Blessing 2 Dusk, that thinner sort of direction of the mid-range, right? So the original B2 and the Dusk are kind of different flavors of a neutral sound, the Dusk being that thinner sound, thinner, more sub-bass focused, and the S8 is very much like that. I actually generally prefer the tonality of the original Blessing 2. It still gives it like a little bit thicker of a mid-range, a little bit more warmth to vocals and stuff like that, which I personally prefer, but it's not like the Dusk or the S8 are very far behind. Now, I can get into a little bit more detail about the specifics of the sound, and I'll start by talking about the bass on the S8, which I kind of already described as being elevated, but not necessarily the focus of this IEM. And you know, if you've not heard an all BA earphone before, it is important to note that the character of bass between balanced armature drivers and dynamic drivers is pretty significant. And if, you know, a lot of people just prefer dynamic driver bass, you're not going to get that out of a balanced armature. And I did find that the bass here on the S8 has actually got pretty good body, pretty good bounce, and really, really strong definition. But it still doesn't quite move air the way that a dynamic driver earphone does. Like even, you know, head to head with the Dusk, which costs half as much, my opinion, I think the bass on the Dusk is strictly better. Like, I don't think there's really anything that the S8 bass does better than the Dusk, which can be a pro or con. I guess it's definitely not a pro for the S8, but how big of a deal that is for you is going to depend on how much you value that bounce in your bass. Anything else I wanted to talk about it? I mean, detail-wise, it was pretty decent here on the S8, and generally I would say that, you know, as much as this is not dynamic driver bass, I did find the bass on the S8 to be among the best bass I've ever heard on a balanced armature. I would say like the only BAs that I've heard with stronger bass or maybe comparable bass would be something like the 64 Audio U12T. That's got really nice bass for a BA. Campfire Audio Aura also has pretty nice bass for a BA. But generally here on the S8, like, well, we'll talk a little bit more. You know what? I'll just go ahead and say it now. Like, one of the earphones I was comparing the S8 to was the Dunu SA6, which I'll slide in here. This is a 6 balanced armature set. I think the bass here on the S8 is quite a bit stronger than the bass here on the SA6. It's one of my issues with the SA6, or pretty much my only issue with the SA6, is the bass is a little bit lacking. And personally, for my bass tastes, I have zero issue with the S8. All right, that's enough talking about the bass. Talk about the mid-range, which really is where I think both the Moondrop Blessing 2 and the S8 really excel, is in that mid-range. Just a lot of detail. You get a lot of micro contrast, so just like the texture and voices and stuff like that is really, really well presented here on the S8. Versus the Blessing 2, especially the Dusk, I have a hard time honestly picking out a lot of differences in the mid-range between the Dusk and the S8. Again, versus the vanilla B2, the vanilla, the original Blessing 2, has got a little bit more warmth and body to it than the mid-range here. Here on the S8, it is a little bit on the thin side. But in terms of detail and texture and stuff like that, I think that they're kind of all in the same ballpark. Yeah, I guess that's about as much as I'm going to say about the mid-range, and so we'll dive into the treble, which I think the treble is where the S8 really stands apart from either of the Blessings. So if you recall my review of the Blessing 2, had a lot of really good things to say about the bass, a lot of really good things to say about the mid-range, some of the best mid-range. But the treble on the Blessing 2, it has a couple of issues, at least in my opinion. One issue is that it can just be a little bit on the harsh side in certain areas of the frequency response. I don't know if it's that 6K hump that you can see in a graph. I don't know if it's something else about some more technical aspect of the treble, but I can just say that generally the treble on the Blessing 2 is good. It's well tuned, but it does have some issues where it just can become a little bit stressed. The other issue that I had with the treble on the Blessing 2 is in the extension. It's not that well extended, it doesn't have that much air, and these are fairly minor complaints in the context of a $300 Blessing 2. Here with the $700 Moondrop S8, expectations certainly get higher, and in my opinion, the S8 achieves it. I think the treble on the S8, in combination with the quality of the mid-range, which again I think is pretty similar to the mid-range on the Blessing 2, the treble on this thing is so good. And if you are a fan of clean treble, I think you will like the S8. It's not like especially forward treble, it's not like an especially bright tune, but it's not shy of treble. It's certainly not dark. But there's just zero harshness to the treble here. There's just an ease to it. There is a slight airiness to it, and loads of detail, and just generally, like, this is the kind of earphone, the S8 is the kind of earphone, you can throw really any track at it and you don't have to worry about it ever getting out of sorts because of either muddy bass or rough treble. It just kind of cuts through everything like butter, and it's just always pretty phenomenal. In fact, I would say of all the earphones that I've heard, this is probably my favorite treble. Yeah, certainly my favorite combination of mid-range and treble. So yeah, pretty solid there. Some other things that we can talk about the S8, I mean, just like general technicalities, soundstage wise, and image separation. I would say that staging, let's go ahead and compare them to the Blessing 2. I kind of describe the Blessing 2 staging as almost like this kind of 90-degree realm, this 90-degree space out in front of your head. It does a pretty decent job with imaging and separation and stuff like that. I found when I listen with the S8, it takes that 90 degrees and it stretches it out about 180 degrees. You can't, that's a terrible. This is a better. All right, this is Blessing 2, and then this is Moondrop S8. I feel like the soundstage and imaging is really coming out pretty squarely around my ears, like 180 degrees outside, and it just adds again to that ease of listening to this thing, and again that perception of detail, the space, the layering. This is again just one of the best treble experiences, if not the best treble experience I've ever had. Again, the bass I think is worth noting. It's not dynamic driver bass, but for me, not a big deal. And I don't know. I think that's really all I really wanted to talk about the Moondrop S8. This really is one of the best sounding earphones I've heard. So with that said, I'll go ahead and give a rating to the Moondrop S8, and out of 5 stars, don't be surprised. I'm gonna give it all 5 stars. I love this earphone. So the build, I think it's aesthetically beautiful. It fits me very, very well. Again, worth noting that it does create that pretty tight seal in the ear and not a lot of venting, if any. In fact, no venting unless you break the seal manually, but the sort of thing that you can get used to. I get used to it. I sleep nights through with this earphone. And then we get to the sound signature, which tonally is very, very good. Say, again, sort of a lean neutral with sub-bass boost. Very, very satisfying. A lot of fun on a lot of tracks. Couldn't really find a single genre that it didn't do well. Mid-range resolution, fantastic. And then that treble, so good. So that is the Moondrop S8. If you're interested in checking out this earphone, of course, I got a link in the description down below. And if you found this review helpful, interesting, or you just didn't hate it, go ahead and hit the like button. It does help other people find content like this. And if you're not already, subscribe to the channel, ding the bell, and then I'll see you on the next Super Review Live. We can have a conversation like the folks in the live chat that I'm about to chat with right now. If you aren't up for that, or you want to chat outside of this sort of scenario, I do also have a Discord server with a link in a pinned comment down below this video. Check that out, join the Discord. We can have conversations about the Moondrop S8. We can talk about other things that I'm reviewing, like the Harmonic Dyne Zeus that I've got sitting back there, or whatever else is on your mind. So again, that is the end of this review. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. All right, live crew. 2 live crew. Did we say that? No. How's it going? Pull up a mouse pad and catch up with the live chat. Don Trumpione with the y'alls. Demetrio Alvarez, hello, how's it going? So Don, you're saying that the Moondrop S8 is the best under $1,000. And I mean, I haven't heard every earphone under $1,000. I know the Thea Audio, Clairvoyance, and Monarch, those are similarly priced here to the S8, and those have a lot of fandom. I know that those also have dynamic drivers for the bass, and so if that is your thing, there's a good chance that the Thea Audio stuff would actually do you better. But for my tastes, I have really 0 complaints about the Moondrop S8. Sup Metal 571, how's it going? Ajmal TF, yeah, that's right. Captain Mark says, I see you pointing out that the nozzles look thick like the Blessing 2. Let's see if we can get a little detail shot here and compare these nozzles head to head. Let me go and pop them off just for ease of comparison. Punch in. So here we've got the Blessing 2 Dusk. And then here we've got the Moondrop S8. And you can see, well, I think you can see that the S8 nozzles are actually a little bit narrower. And that might not seem like a ton, but in my experience, at least in my ear canals, it is enough to be noticeable in the ear. I find the S8 generally a more comfortable IEM, by quite a bit, frankly. Not that I have a big issue with the comfort on the Blessing 2, it's just, it takes some fitting, whereas the Moondrop S8 really does just plug into my ears without any issue whatsoever. I'll throw this thing back on the cable for demonstration purposes. But yeah, did that help kind of compare the nozzle sizes? Oh, Ajmal, so you were the one that said TF. You're asking, is it really $700? Can you zoom in it really close so you can see the insides? I hope you got the inside view. This is actually a part of the saga that I forgot to mention in the review, and I should have mentioned. So to answer the question, is it worth $700? In my opinion, yeah. In fact, I like this earphone so much that I bought my own. This is not the one that I had on loan. I gave that loan model back to Precog. And now I've got my own Moondrop S8 because I love this earphone so much. Michael Thompson asking what tips am I using? So these are Asla Sedna lights. I think I've got the light shorts as well. Basically, the only real reason that I switch tips on these earphones is that, as you can see here on the Blessing, and the S8 is the same, there's no like lip on the nozzle to hold tips on, and so you really need something that's going to grip onto it. And I find stock tips generally work pretty well out of the box, but over time, at least on my Blessing 2, they stretched out a little bit and they didn't grip as well. So I ended up throwing on, at one point I had Zelastex on them. In fact, I still have Zelastex on my vanilla Blessing 2, but now I've switched over here to just the standard Sednas. Really is just to keep them on the nozzles a little bit better. It wasn't even a big issue really on the Blessing 2, but it was the sort of thing that I was concerned about. You never want a tip falling off inside your ear. It's not fun. So Don, you're asking details on the S8 versus the Dusk. Some people say the S8 is a side grade at 2.5 times the price. So like I was describing, I feel like you could make a pretty good argument that Blessing 2 and S8 are basically on the same level when it comes to the mid-range. I think mid-range tuning, this is very, very similar to the Dusk. I would have a very hard time picking it out. I mean, there's sort of like the staging and the stereo separation stuff that I think the S8 does a step above, but otherwise, like if you're just looking at pure detail, texture, and information that you're getting out of it, again, I think in the mid-range, you could definitely say it's a side grade, but it really is that treble where I think the S8 stands out. And now if you prioritize bass and you want that dynamic driver bass, there's a good chance you would actually prefer the Blessing 2 or the Dusk. But for my taste, because treble is so important to just to what I enjoy out of audio, as well as like it solves, I feel like even if treble isn't your priority, the treble on the Blessing 2, again, it feels like too much to say that it's a problem, but it is a thing that is occasionally an issue. And here with the S8, you just don't have to worry about it. Landstander, I see you're asking about the S8 versus the Andromeda. I don't think I've heard the Andromeda yet, although there's a good chance I might be reviewing the Andromeda somewhat soon. So stay tuned, we'll have that comparison soon. And yeah, Captain Mark, I see you pointing out that for 30 bucks more you can get the Monarch, and again, I think if bass is your priority, the Monarch, I haven't heard it, but I trust that it might actually, I trust that that is probably the better solution for bass heads. Or even if you're not a bass head, you're just an appreciator of the bass. But again, I really have no issues with the bass here for my personal tastes. That said, I am still very interested to try out the Monarch and the Clairvoyance. Michael Thompson, I see you elaborating a little bit on the tips question, asking what would make these more comfortable. In my opinion, so like a thing that at least works well for me with both the Blessing 2 and the S8 is just to go with small tips. Typically I wear medium-sized tips, but here with these, because they seal so well in the inner ear, in the ear canal, I get away with small tips and I find that it fits more comfortably. In fact, I've used super small, SS, small. Yeah, just try the smallest tip that you can get away with. As long as it's creating a nice seal, you might be able to get away with a more comfortable fit that way. Metal saying you want to compare these to the Dusk directly one day. Maybe I'll hook you up. If you want to borrow, I've got both the Dusk and the S8. I'm going to be loaning out the S8 to someone else pretty soon, another reviewer, Lucident, if you're not familiar with him. But when this comes back, if you haven't got it yet, Metal, let me know. Jaku, welcome to the live stream. How's it going? Jaku, no, I have not used the Moondrop A8, which is the predecessor to the S8. It seems like it's very similar, but the base contour is pretty different there on the A8. This looks like it's a little bit more refined. And then I hope the clarification on the tips, they are Assless said no light shorts, which is a mouthful. Uh-oh, do I gotta ban somebody? This is rare. Okay, I think I just banned somebody. Apologies for that, David Bridges. If you had something important on your mind, join the Discord and talk about it there. Kari Gori asking how many drivers does it have? S8, it's in the name. It's 8 drivers per ear, so I guess 16 drivers total. All balanced armatures. JTB with an interesting question. Would I be able to compare the sound of the S8 to any of the headphones that I've heard? And honestly, no. I can't really think of a headphone that sounds like this. I mean, like, the Moondrop Blessing 2, the vanilla version of it, I kind of equate, like, it doesn't sound, it's not an exact facsimile, but I kind of describe that in similar ways that I would describe the Sennheiser HD600. It's a mid-range forward headphone with a little bit of a thick, full mid-range, not like super thick and super full. It's not like a bassy warm, but it's just got a little bit of mid-range warmth to it, which I think is very similar to the HD600 headphone. This is thinner than that. It's got kind of a little contour taken out of the lower mid-range, which I find makes it just sound generally thinner than the HD600. So maybe that would be my frame of reference, is imagine an HD600 which with a little bit thinner mid-range. I don't know. I can't really think of anything like that, to be honest. Kind of curious, actually, Metal, if you're still around, is there a headphone that you would describe that way, as an HD600 but thinner? And then I think also, I guess worth pointing out, is that the bass on this is quite a bit different than the bass on the HD600. The HD600, it's got a little bit of a bass roll-off, not big on sub bass. The sub bass on here is much more prominent. So again, that's not very good comparison. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a good headphone comparison to this, to be honest. DeJuan asking about DAX Synergy for the S8. I don't know. I didn't do a whole lot of DAX Synergy testing with this thing. What did I mostly listened to it on my Walkman, to be honest, as well as the Cayenne N3 Pro, which I was reviewing. So that Cayenne has an AKM, but I don't know. It sounds, the difference in DAX is generally pretty minor. Catching up with the chat. What happened to Pono Player? Chris Stroud with the deep cut. Pono Player, for those who don't remember, for those who, wow, I'm guessing the olds are going to remember the Pono Player. Was it like, I don't even remember the rock star. Neil Young, some like classic rock star, made an MP3 player. It wasn't an MP3 player. It was some high-res audio player that called the Pono Player. It was the shape of a triangle, which was kind of weird. I don't know what happened to that thing. Terry Huang asking, where did I get this t-shirt? I got this t-shirt from the Super Review merch store. If you want to get this shirt for yourself, I actually have a link in that same pinned comment right below this video. Juan, okay, I'll ban Juan. That's a good call. What's up, Juan? Martin Murphy asking, have I picked up any new camera gear lately? I guess it depends on what you mean by lately. What is the latest camera gear I've got? No, I haven't gotten anything new in camera world for about a year maybe. The last thing that I got in the camera world is I got a Nikon Z6 full frame camera, and I use it exclusively for shooting my manual Olympus OM lenses. So I got the Nikon Z6, I got an OM adapter, and I'm just using my old film lenses. Not nearly enough, but it's a lot of fun. Landstander asking, did I try driving it different ways? Curious if it changed the profile at all. No, I haven't tried, I haven't really done much with this in terms of trying to change the profile of the sound. I know it's an all BA set, so if you run this out of a high impedance source, and by high impedance, I would, I would say anything above 30 ohms, which is pretty high impedance for an output source, you'd probably notice some sort of difference in the sound. Generally with balanced armatures, the effect of increased output impedance is that you kind of tilt the frequency response away from bass and toward treble. I think I'm doing that the right direction for you, but whatever. So let's say you have the Etymotic ER4XR, it's a single balanced armature. You can do this experiment, very repeatable. Up the output impedance, which you can do with little adapters, and it will reduce the bass and increase the upper mid-range and treble. So just kind of pivots the sound signature at roughly 1000 hertz. With multi-BA sets like this, the effect is much less predictable and, in my experience, always bad. I didn't test it with the Moondrop S8 because, again, generally my experience is that it's always bad. Not a fun thing, but I don't know, there's a chance that it does something worthwhile. And Jeff J, you're asking me what gear do I use to test the S8. For the most part, I use my Sony Walkman, which I don't have sitting around here. But yeah, Sony Walkman NWA105. It's portable, it's convenient. That's primarily what I used. But I did also listen to it on the Cayenne N3 Pro. I did try the tubes a little bit, but I don't know. This thing doesn't, I don't know. Maybe you would like the way that tubes affect the sound of this, but for me, I was generally more happy with just kind of the pure neutral sound. And Metal, you're saying that the HD600, but thinner lower mids and sizable bass shelf sounds like textbook Harman in your Target. Yeah, that's about right. And sign me up for the S8 loaner. Cool, all right. I will sign you up. Jesse Pinkman, review the Galaxy Buds Pro. I am interested in the Galaxy Buds Pro, but I got kind of a lot on my plate right now, so I'm gonna try and knock out some stuff that I've got lined up. And if the Galaxy Buds Pro still seem interesting, maybe I'll check them out. I actually just recently, my buddy loaned me his set of original Galaxy Buds, and I was able to do a head-to-head comparison with the Galaxy Buds versus the Galaxy Buds Plus, which I own. Wait, is that right? Plus? Wow, this naming structure. Yes, the second gen Galaxy Buds are the ones that I own. And I compared them with his original first gen Galaxy Buds. And I actually prefer the second gen. I felt that tonally, the original gen was just a little bit shrill, frankly, in the upper mid-range. Not that I'm necessarily shy of that kind of stuff. I'm a fan of the Moondrop SSR, but I did find it a little bit shrill, and just it didn't have the same body and texture that I think the later model got. And some of that probably comes in from that increased sub-bass presence, but I feel like there's a little bit more to it. I felt like the timbre on the newer model was better, not just that it had more bass, but I felt that the actual representation of notes, especially in the treble region, to me just sounded more natural on the new generation. Wow, the second generation Galaxy Buds. Martin, yeah, shooting Olympus, last I saw on Insta, and I still have my Olympus cameras. I just don't go outside with them very much. I shoot mostly with my iPhone now. Ajmal, you're asking about a link to Discord in the chat. I've got it in a pinned comment below the video. I know you're in live chat right now, but there still should be comments below this video. And if not, maybe that's a mobile thing, I'm not sure. At least after this live stream, that comment section will be available. Brady Vane, glad you found the channel and you bought a DAC and you love it. Cool. Next step up, get the Koss KSC 75, 15 bucks, you will love it, promise. And Ajmal asked me, what's my job? I figure YouTube is not a full-time thing. You're correct, I don't do YouTube full-time. My day job is I work in product development for media website, basically build websites and apps. Don asked me, when am I going to review Clairvoyance and Monarch? You got to hit up Linsel and ask them when I'm going to review it, because I don't know. Linsel hasn't hooked me up in a while. JTB with the clarification, Pono Player was a Neil Young project. Cool, I remember that correctly. I don't even think I could identify a Neil Young song, but I did remember that for some reason. Chris Stroud, what drivers are better for cheap Chinese IEMs? In the budget space, I would stick to dynamic drivers. Yeah, I would just generally stick to dynamic drivers. I think there are more good dynamic driver earphones in the budget space than there are balanced armatures. In fact, what's the cheapest BA set that like I would recommend? It's like the File FH3, and that's, you know, even a hybrid. Yeah, I would stick to dynamic drivers. Blonde BL03, Tin Hi-Fi T2 Plus, Moondrop SSR. Those are kind of like the three right now. And for me, it's the Moondrop SSR. Mr. Beast of East, asking, any interest in reviewing the Illumination? Yes, very interested. Taranku, what's up? How's it going? Oh, Brady Vane, you clarified you were talking about a DAP. You got one of them DAPs, right? Is that how they do it? Is that how the kids do it? No, that's not right. That is going to be, however, the end of this live stream. I've got dinner waiting for me outside. It's Friday night. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. Again, if you like this video, if you found it helpful, please hit the like button. It really does help out the channel. If you're here at this point, you're probably already subscribed, but just in case, if you're not, subscribe to the channel, ding the bell. YouTube will let you know next time I'm live, and then I'll see you on the next Super Review.